We're going to talk about what it takes to have a marriage survive and flourish. Many people, of course, understand this intuitively, usually without knowing what they understand, but many people don't. As Sophie said, Jackie and I are both psychiatrists. We've worked with many couples, and we write about marriage along with what we hope is its opposite, loneliness. But we also have a lasting marriage with each other. Happy to tell you that it's not just the marriage that lasted, so has our love. But that's not where I want to start. I want to start with this map. I want to start with the longest fight that we ever had geographically, at least. It lasted across 5 states. We were racing a nor'easter that was covering the whole region from New England to the upper Midwest with a blizzard, trying to get there in time to meet our first grandchild. It should have been a happy trip, of course, but it wasn't. Somehow we got into something. We don't remember what it was. We'll come back to that. That's actually important. But it just kept going and going, getting worse and worse, colder and more distant by the mile. By the time we got there, I was able to summarize everything that Jackie had said to me with 6 initials. DC, DC, DJ. Don't criticize, don't complain, don't joke, except at my own expense. Of course, I was being provocative, but it also is a pretty good, succinct summary of my marital failings. I was able to get to that epiphany partly because we had to keep driving. We had to keep beating the snowstorm, so I couldn't stalk out of the room. That turns out to be an important point that we'll come back to also. What brought us back together, though, at the end of the trip was certainly not my epiphany. It was the shared joy of meeting our first grandchild together.
Well, Richard was going to talk about the natural law of motion between 2 people, so I'm going to give him another chance.
I completely forgot. Yes. I figured, I was looking at Jackie there, and I figured it had to be her. Yes, okay. So there is there's a simple law of motion for all human relationships. At any point in time, 2 people are either moving closer together or further apart. Sometimes like this, but there's no alternative. You can't hold it fixed. Because of that constant motion, there's always a danger of a dangerous drift apart. It's true for all relationships, not just romantic ones. Closeness attained inevitably starts a drift apart. We meet, we fall in love, we become lovers. We share the joy of learning more and more about each other, getting to know each other better and better, feeling closer and closer. For a while, nothing else matters. But it can't go on forever, and of course we wouldn't even want it to go on forever and then spend the rest of our lives gazing into each other's eyes. No, of course not. The very closeness of love, the comfort of it, the security of it, eventually allows our attention to shift outward again, to other things, and yes, even to other people. We become absorbed in our work, in our children, in our favorite activities, in our friends. We become a little less attentive, a little less curious, a little less engaged with our familiar beloved. Again, not a bad thing. It makes life more interesting. But it becomes dangerous if these drifts apart go on too long unchecked. We can begin to feel estranged. We can begin to feel that our love has died. We can begin to panic and plan our exit strategy. The good news is that what emerges in a lasting relationship is a kind of tide-like motion, an ebb and flow of closeness, rather than an ending. And the very movement apart, the separate experiences, allow us to become curious about each other again and recapture that joyful sense of moving towards another and actually finding something new there.
Now, you might think that this law of motion is something that you hadn't noticed in your own relationship. So it's a little bit easier to talk about if we think about toddlers. When they're playing, they come for a big hug or snuggle with their parent or caretaker, and then they're able to make a wide circle of exploration until they need their next snuggle. And we see that in toddlers all the time, and we don't think it's so odd that they need to refuel and connect on a regular basis. And really, we grown-ups are like that too, but we do it on a longer timeline. We can have some time alone over the weekend where we can converse and touch and make love. And we have some time alone which sort of fuels us so we can be brave and go out to our week and do our own thing. So really, it's a little bit like the law of motion you see in children, but we're talking about it existing in grown-ups too. And when it happens week to week and we have a chance to connect on the weekend, that's no big deal, and we don't even think of it as ebb and flow. But of course, in every long-term relationship, there are going to be times where somebody has to take a trip, somebody might get sick, somebody might have to tend to a family member or a friend or a work project, and weeks or even months can go by where suddenly there isn't that time alone to reconnect. And that can be quite hazardous and dangerous. And so we always hope that someone in the couple, and maybe both people, can have what we call a distance alarm. Click. It's not a very good picture of the distance alarm, but somebody has to notice when that disconnection has gone on too long. And when they notice it, they may comment on it, or they may throw a fit, or pick a fight, or seduce, but there will be something that will say, this has been going on too long, I'm starting to feel estranged, I'm starting to feel awkward and rusty. And we even have something we call the rustiness phenomenon, which is when you haven't had a chance to be alone with your partner for a few weeks, you can start feeling shy and awkward, and you don't quite know what the problem is. So that distance alarm is a very important thing, and I'll let you go on from here.
Yeah. These ordinary drifts apart are more dangerous these days because so many people grow up in families of divorce or single-parent families with no first-hand experience of what a happy marriage looks like over time. The more a child has no experience with a lasting marriage in their own parents, the more the child invents a script for what a loving relationship ought to look like out of movies, stories, imagination. The less experience with real-life lasting relationships, the more that script looks like a romantic fairy tale. And when that person who enters a marriage already scared that marriages can't last, begins to see that life is not following that script, there is a sense of, oh my God, the bells just aren't ringing anymore. This isn't going to work. And people begin giving up prematurely. It's also harder these days when social media and dating apps, even Tinder, give us this illusion of a limitless universe of possibilities for more perfect unions. Temptation, of course, is as old as the devil, but we have digital multipliers for it. One of my favorite old studies, not that old, of internet dating, compared it to speed dating. Speed daters, of course, had fewer choices, but they actually went on more dates and got to know more real people. The internet daters were lost in this universe of infinitely receding possibilities, their gaze always shifting from the person in front of them to the person who might be just around the corner. Smartphones also make those drifts worse. In a relationship, when do we look at our phones? Well, this has actually been studied. We look at our phones when we're feeling a little left out, a little neglected. We look at our phones during those relational ebbs. What a relief. We're deeply included in something again, even if it's just our imagining our camping trip with our new LL Bean camping gear. And of course, what happens? Then it's our partner who is feeling left out. There's a new word that I just learned a few weeks ago, phubbing. Snubbing someone with your phone. It's official now. It is really bad for couples, and it's incredibly common. The smartphone might be just about the perfect instrument to create what Jackie and I have called the spiral of hurt feelings. And here's half of it.
I'm experiencing it. So I'm going to talk about that in just a moment, but I want to go back to what Richard said about temptation for a moment. Temptation sounds so old-fashioned and kind of biblical, and we don't really talk in those terms anymore, but we really should be, because people spend so much time at work, and they spend so much time talking to their coworkers at work, and sometimes getting very close over the years to somebody at work, that they don't quite recognize that that could be a temptation, and they could start preferring to talk to the person at work than to their home spouse. There's a new expression, work spouse. And so we want to remind modern people that even though temptation sounds like something that went out in the 1900s, it's still very much present, and it's still something that can play a role in a marriage where you may have to say to your partner, you know, I'm sick of hearing about how wonderful so-and-so is. It might be that you have to back off now. That is a temptation I don't want in our marriage. And so we feel that jealousy has a role to play in marriages, as does the distance alarm. And jealousy is a kind of distance alarm, where you notice that your partner is getting a little closer to someone else than to you.
I'm sorry.
But going back to that spiral of hurt feelings, there I am again. The spiral of
It just keeps coming back.
The spiral of hurt feelings that we notice causing the vast majority of fights is that your partner says something when they're chatting along and it hurts your feelings, and it's over something so trivial and small that you don't want to make a fuss about it. You just want to act grown up and not go around pouting, so you try to turn your attention elsewhere, but all of a sudden you notice that you want to say something a little bit nasty back. But basically, this spiral of hurt feelings is a dangerous thing because the person whose feelings are hurt is often very reluctant to, there she is again, is very reluctant to tell what really hurt their feelings. And one of the antidotes to this is that you do have to mention what hurt your feelings. You have to let the other person know what happened. And that means putting your pride aside and being willing to say, you know, when you said that, it made me furious. And that's why I've attacked on a new frontier. And Richard will talk more about this.
Yeah, our car trip was a lot like that. That was a spiral of hurt feelings extending state after state. I said we don't know how it started, and we don't, but I have a guess. My guess is that as we were getting underway, Jackie probably said something about my not being really good at last-minute changes of plans and rearranging all our logistics to leave a day early and beat the storm. Who of us wants to admit the trivial things that actually hurt our feelings in a relationship and talk about them? Of course not. What do we do instead? We pick a fight in some other area, because we're already angry. We pick a fight in some area where we feel we hold better cards, and we got half a chance. And that, of course, takes our partner out of left field. Why is this happening? And pretty soon, you're trading hurts all the way to Michigan. And of course, it was also important that we had to keep driving, and as I said, I couldn't stalk out, something I have been known to do.
There is a researcher named John Gottman in Seattle who has a marriage lab where he has couples come in and have their usual fights in a little booth. And they're not at all unhappy with this alternative. They want to have that fight again. And they get hooked up to a blood pressure and a heart monitor, and they go at it. And usually about 7 or 8 minutes in, if they happen to be a heterosexual couple, the woman gets angrier and angrier, and she's sort of strident and shrill, and she might even be crying, and the man is looking strangely impassive and not showing any sign that he even hears what she's saying. But what is really interesting is that the woman's blood pressure and heart rate are going up very slowly, and the man's heart rate and blood pressure are going up very steeply and through the roof. And then the man says, I think I need a break. And he walks out of the room and says to the researchers, you know, I felt like my head was going to explode. And it turns out that he was taking a break not because he disrespects what his partner was saying, but rather because he needed to get his physiological markers back in the normal range. And so we think this really ought to be taught in high school or even junior high, middle school, because it's such an important difference in physiology, and people don't know it. And so women are inclined to take it as a sign of disrespect if their partner stalks out.
Of course, these drifts apart can be quieter, calmer, and much harder to notice. I was having lunch with an old friend of mine a few years ago, and he was telling me about a trip that he was planning with his wife to Nova Scotia. And he was explaining why the time away from their usual routines and responsibilities mattered so much to them. Let's see if I can find that quote. Yes. Oh, this is what he actually said. When Louise gets busy and has meetings out 3 nights in a week and I'm caught up in a project and working late, by the end of the week, I know it shouldn't happen so quickly, but she begins to be in a world where I can no longer easily reach her, even though we've been together for so long. My friend had a distance alarm. That's what it sounds like. And he was doing something about it. It's not very hard to do. Most couples are automatically making these kinds of adjustments all the time. But it gets harder to do if you let the drift go on unchecked for so long that you feel estranged, that you don't even actually know how to reach out to the other person anymore. And it also gets much harder if that world where I can no longer reach Louise is a world in which someone else is reaching her too much of the time. We write books together. We even write books about marriage together. I can attest that, that this is a high-risk move for marriage. Of course, we fight more when we're writing, and I invariably forget that DC-DC-DJ vow when we're writing together. But it's also a shared project that brings us closer together. I have another old friend. His wife, many years into their marriage, began writing a book with someone else. And within, I think it was 3 years, she was married to that someone else. Which is why we actually think that some degree of jealousy and the distance alarm is important, as long as it's not holding everything so rigid, so that it doesn't allow this natural movement back and forth, which is actually what a healthy relationship looks like.
Let me say one other thing that I forgot to say before, and then I'll start finishing up. But what I wanted to say was that in a way we can think of each and every one of us as a sort of signal beaconing tower. And we're all looking for signals from other people to see whether they still like us, whether they love us, whether they need us. So if you don't receive a signal from your partner or your friends' beacon towers, so to speak, for a little while, you start to feel quite rejected, even though they didn't do anything in particular to hurt your feelings. So really, just looking to see whether there are signals that your partner is interested in you, likes you still, wants you, needs you, that's what we all do, and that's how we keep our relationships going. So many times when we're working with people, we have to remind them that they have to send out those signals periodically, or their relationships may wither and die because no one knows that they care anymore.
And also, it's important not to send out those signals to other people, like my friend's wife's co-writer. This is one of the earliest findings of industrial psychology. When two people work closely together, if they can stand each other at all, they begin to share more about things other than work. They begin to confide in each other. They begin to care about each other. And naturally, some of the time, those feelings ripple over into sexual feelings, and it's not very surprising. And you have to be cautious about it.
But to finish up, I want to say that there is a milieu that makes marriages flourish. And that is a milieu with lots of old friends and family who you get to see regularly. You really need to be tied into a social fabric. And you may think from our talk that we're essentially saying a couple should cocoon, it's too dangerous to make friends outside the marriage, just don't even think about it. But we're not saying that. We're saying that we love the idea of couples staying in touch with their old friends. It takes some pressure off of the marriage to be everything to one another. It allows you to see your partner through other people's eyes. It allows you to talk to other people than just your partner. And it's a really wonderfully important thing for the flourishing of a marriage. So we do think that social fabric of old friends and family, and even new friends, to be a wonderful thing. And we want to thank you so much for inviting us to your beautiful island.
Yes, thank you so much.